2 days after capturing the Indian Air Force pilot Wing Commander Abhinandan, Pakistan is set to release him today. Pakistan government sources say that Wing Commander Abhinandan will return to India, although the Attari-Wagah border at this point in time is likely to see the beating retreat ceremony being called off. Sources say the Indian Air Force pilot will be flown down from Wagah to Amritsar and then from there on to Delhi. As India awaits the Indian Air Force pilot's return, the Border Security Force has cancelled the daily beating retreat and ban ceremony at the Attari-Wagah border. Also, the Punjab police has removed the crowd from the area. Sources say this has been done to ensure that the repatriation process does not turn into a public spectacle. On the diplomatic front, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj, attending the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, India has been invited to the event as guest of honor. Now, addressing the Council's inaugural session, Sushma Swaraj stressed on the need to build pressure on countries that support terror outfits without naming Pakistan. She urged the OIC to tell such states to dismantle terror infrastructure and stop providing funding to terror groups. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has skipped the OIC event. After the UAE refused to drop the invitation to India, Pakistan decided not to attend but to send an envoy instead. Addressing the joint session of the Pakistan Parliament, Qureshi said, and I quote, "I will not attend the Council of Foreign Ministers as a matter of principle for them having extended an invitation as a guest of honor to Sushma Swaraj," end of quote. Now, staying with statements from Pakistan's Foreign Minister, in an interaction with CNN, Shah Mahmood Qureshi admitted that Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar, who has been accused by India of masterminding several terror attacks, is in Pakistan. However, Qureshi added that for the Pakistan authorities to arrest Azhar, India would first have to hand over proof that is acceptable in Pakistani courts. Back home, ahead of Wing Commander Abhinandan's return, Prime Minister Modi has said the entire nation was proud of the Indian Air Force pilot. The Prime Minister has also warned opposition parties against politicizing India-Pakistan tensions. This, even as the Prime Minister launched a political attack against the previous UPA government, accusing the UPA of inaction after events like 26/11. Listen in.
Every Indian is proud that the brave Wing Commander Abhinandan belongs to Tamil Nadu. India had been facing the menace of terrorism for years, but there is a big difference now. There were several terror attacks. There were blasts in Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Jaipur, Bengaluru, Delhi, Mumbai, Pune, and other places. The nation expected those responsible for these acts of terror to be punished, but nothing happened. But when Uri happened, you saw what our brave soldiers did. Pulwama happened, and you saw what our brave air warriors did. There was a time when the news reports would read, Air Force wanted to do surgical strike after 26/11, but UPA blocked it. And today, we are in an era where the news reads, armed forces have full freedom to do what they want.
Well, that is the Prime Minister speaking at a rally in Tamil Nadu, making it very clear that this is going to be part of the election narrative. The Prime Minister there attacking the UPA for going soft on terror and also saying that the UPA had refused to use air power, but to be factually accurate, it was also Mr. Vajpayee in the NDA. He had also decided against the use of air power, but we'll get to that in just a second. Jyoti Kamal and Parikshit Luthra join us now with the latest on Wing Commander Abhinandan Vartaman's return. Jyoti is at the Wagah border. Jyoti, what is the latest that you're picking up now in terms of the arrangements there for the repatriation of Wing Commander Abhinandan?
Yes, Shireen, in fact, several developments. Let me just run you through all of them. Wing Commander Abhinandan now near Lahore, and the proceedings will take place at the Wagah border. Now, Wagah is the Pakistani side, Atari is on the Indian side. So once formalities are completed on the Wagah side, at this point in time, of course, Wing Commander Abhinandan, known to us to have reached Lahore, from where it will take him about another half an hour to reach Wagah, and there the proceedings will take place. Thereafter, the handing over will take place onto the Indian side, which is Atari. And at this point in time, there are two air vice marshals also from the Indian Air Force who have reached this spot. There is a military escort also that has now arrived at this spot. So once the formalities are over, he will be whisked away from here towards the airport. From the airport, he'll be flown towards Delhi. Delhi is where his family is. And of course, the debriefing will also take place in Delhi. So for now, but in terms of the retreat ceremony that was to take place, there are three components of the retreat ceremony. One is the public side of it, where the people go in. That has been cancelled. The second is the BSF ceremonial kind of activities that take place inside. They have also been cancelled. Of course, the flag will be lowered, which is the retreat ceremony. But the public side has been cancelled today to make sure that there is no untoward incident. There are not thousands of people who are inside. But again, this is a situation which is only 50% controlled, because 50% of it happens on the Pakistani side, and that is happening as normal as before. It's the Indian side where the public side has been cancelled. But in about an hour and a half from now, it is expected that Wing Commander Abhinandan will be on the Indian side, will be back on Indian soil.
All right, we are awaiting that in another 30 to 35 or 40 minutes. As Jyoti Kamal is pointing out, Wing Commander Abhinandan should cross over across the Indian border. But remember, the Indian media as well as the Indian public has been kept away from the beating retreat ceremony. But let me go across to my colleague Parikshit Luthra, who's also been tracking this. And Parikshit, you were one of the first who said that this was not something that the government was keen on. They didn't want to turn this into a public spectacle, perhaps to quash the narrative that this is a goodwill gesture on the part of Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan.
Yesterday, top sources in the government had told us that Pakistan cannot use this as a negotiating card. They cannot use the individual, Wing Commander Abhinandan, to hold the entire country hostage. And if Pakistan thinks they can change the narrative completely by sending back Wing Commander Abhinandan, they are sadly mistaken. So this is what the Indian government is sticking to, that the fundamental question of terror emanating from Pakistan is yet to be addressed. Our forces, be it the Navy, the Air Force or the Army, they all remain on high alert. And if anybody has to act and show credible proof of action, it is Pakistan, which needs to act against the Jaish-e-Mohammed, the Lashkar-e-Toiba, Maulana Masood Azhar and Hafiz Saeed. Till the time we see that action coming from Pakistan, there will be no dialogue. So the government feels that if there is too much media coverage for Wing Commander Abhinandan on his return via the Wagah border, we would be playing in the hands of Pakistan. We would only give them fodder to change the narrative, shift the narrative from Pakistan-sponsored terror, from all those terror attacks that have happened in India, to a goodwill gesture that Imran Khan has done, and he would like to play to the international community. So this is the kind of situation the Indian government and our forces want to really avoid. While we are really eagerly awaiting him, we want him to come back home immediately. We would like to ask him about what happened. They would like to keep sentiments rather muted. Our sources in the Indian High Commission in Pakistan also saying that he would cross over around 6 p.m. this evening.
All right, Parikshit and Jyoti Kamal, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Let's go across to our guests now and discuss the implications of the return of Wing Commander Abhinandan and the course to chart from here on. Joining us on the show, Air Marshal R.K. Sharma, the former Vice Chief of the Indian Air Force, also with us, former diplomat, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, and the editor of First Post, Praveen Swami. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the show. Ambassador Prakash, if I could start by asking you, India's decision to hold back the beating retreat ceremony, to hold back the public, to hold back the media, and the view seems to be that, look, we don't want this to become about Pakistan's generosity. We don't want this to become about Pakistan's sagacity and this humanitarian gesture that Imran Khan has offered. This needs to be seen in context, that this is only one step on Pakistan's part, but a lot more needs to be done. Do you believe that this is the right approach to take? Well, I'll get to Ambassador Prakash in just a second. Praveen, let me put that same question to you. Do you think that this is the right approach to take? We seem to be having some trouble with audio links, but Marshal Sharma, let me ask you, sir, do you believe that this is the right approach to take, given the fact that this was going to become a bit of a public spectacle, a media spectacle, the Indian government saying that, look, let's keep this off public and the media, let Wing Commander Abhinandan be repatriated, and let's do this without the glare of cameras?
Yes, I would completely agree with that. But I would, it would have been more appropriate if the Pakistani government had accepted, if there was such an offer, and accepted an offer from Indian government to fly him out directly, for the reasons that, it's possible that after the ejection, Wing Commander Abhinandan would have suffered certain amount of injuries, particularly spinal and foot injuries, and therefore it's not correct to expose him to further stress by way of travel, and an airlift from there to Delhi would have been the best thing to do. Notwithstanding whatever the decisions that have been made, if he is coming across Wagah, then there is absolutely no need of a public spectacle. He's a serving officer, he's in uniform, and he must come across and ferried to Delhi. So I think this is the correct step to take. There is no need to make a public spectacle out of it.
Let me take that point across to Praveen Swami. Praveen, the question that I was asking, do you believe that this is the right approach? The Indian government believes, let's not make this into a public spectacle, a media spectacle, and let's quash the narrative of this being an act of generosity on the part of Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, because this is only the first step that is expected of Pakistan to deliver on the promises that it has made.
Absolutely. I think if you look at the slightly bigger picture here, this offered Pakistan a fortuitous, a lucky off-ramp, if you like, a way to get off this escalation highway, which had set in after its attempts to hit at Indian air bases yesterday. Now, essentially, Pakistan thought that by raising the ante to by a massive level, by going for Indian military targets, it would succeed in establishing the robustness of its deterrence. It would signal to India that, look, even if you pursue terrorists across the border, we're willing to go to war, we're even willing to go close to the nuclear threshold. But what followed after that extremely irresponsible course of action was intense diplomatic activity behind the scenes. I think Pakistan was told quite bluntly by both the United States and by its allies in West Asia that it needed to get off this road, and returning a prisoner of war, which normally happens at the end of a military crisis, was a signal from them that they're done with this particular chapter. The important thing, though, is that it still doesn't solve India's concerns. India didn't just strike at this terror training camp to kill terrorists. If anything, that was a peripheral objective. It was intended to make a point about India's deep anger at the way events were playing out. And I think India will be seeking guarantees from Prime Minister Imran Khan that the Jaish-e-Mohammed, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, other jihadist groups operating in Pakistan will be reined in. Now, what kinds of promises will be credible in India? After all, we've been here before. What kinds of promises will be credible remains to be seen, and that will be the stuff of diplomacy in coming days.
Yeah, speaking of next steps now, and I want to talk a little bit about the CNN interview, Christian Amanpour interviewing the Pakistan Foreign Affairs Minister. And Praveen Swami, I want you to comment on that, because we were just talking about Pakistan's inability previously to come good on the assurances that it's made with respect to the JEM. When being asked, is Masood Azhar in Pakistan, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Pakistan said Masood Azhar is in Pakistan, and to my knowledge, he's very unwell, and is unwell to an extent that he cannot leave his house. On the question of arresting him, he says that India needs to give us evidence that is acceptable in the courts of Pakistan. After all, we will have to justify in the courts of Pakistan. So if they have unalienable evidence, share it with us. I mean, you've got to take this with a little bit of a pinch of salt. There is not just evidence that India has provided, but the rest of the world has provided ample evidence against Masood Azhar.
quite frankly, Shireen, I mean, these remarks are laughable. Forget India's voluminous evidence.
Yes.
Forget the evidence that led the United Nations Security Council to proscribe the Jaish. Forget what the Americans, what provoked the Americans to blacklist Masood Azhar. We can look at the words of Lieutenant General Javed Qazi, the former ISI chief, in Pakistan's own Senate after 2002, where he stood up in the Senate and on the floor of the House said that the Jaish-e-Mohammed was responsible for the killings of innocent Kashmiris, was responsible for the killing of Daniel Pearl, the journalist, and was responsible for attacks within Pakistan on General Musharraf itself. Now, a minister of the Pakistan government, a former ISI chief, says this. I cannot understand what more evidence Pakistan wants. But having said that, these lies have been abounding in recent weeks.
Well, yes, the lies have been abounding in recent weeks, as Praveen Swami has painstakingly been pointing out here on the program. But Marshal Sharma, let me come back to you. Within the next 30-odd minutes or so, Wing Commander Abhinandan will be back across the border. We are given to understand he will be brought to New Delhi for the debriefing. Take us through the process from here on, sir. He is a serving officer. We saw that with Flight Lieutenant Nachiket as well, post the Kargil conflict. What are the steps now for his re-initiation, so to speak, back into regular workforce and work life?
Yes, okay. This is a standard operating procedure. Once he comes to Delhi, I would imagine he would first be given medical attention. That is the most important part. The debrief can take place later. Once he's declared medically fit and he's got his sort of breath back, and if there is any other injuries that need to be treated, then the agencies would like to ascertain from him that after the time he has landed to the time he has come back, what all he has been through. This is important for our agencies to sort of build the picture, and he will reveal all that, and all that will be taken a note of. So that is the process of debriefing, and anything else that he has to say. So that will happen, and once all that is over, depending upon his state of fitness, he will revert back to his unit. That is it. It is as simple as that.
It is as simple as that. But Marshal Sharma, if I may just get both
yes,
you, Praveen Swami,
yes.
as well as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, to comment on, the preemptive non-military airstrikes conducted by India. And as has been spoken over the last 48 hours or so, that this, in a sense, is a new paradigm that India has drawn, a new doctrine, so to speak, that we are not afraid to use air power. If it were to come to that, this is preemptive, it is preventive on India's part to be able to use its air power. Yesterday, we saw that joint briefing of the three forces and Air Vice Marshal Kapoor basically saying that our objectives were achieved in that strike, but we cannot give any details on the casualties, etc. Now, there's, again, a lot of stuff that's starting to come in, satellite imagery and so on and so forth. Do you believe that we're missing the point by sort of trying to focus too much on what the casualty was or how significant the damage was? Or do you believe we should focus on the fact that for the first time since 1971, we have decided to cross the line of control and draw this line that India will retaliate preemptively and put in place this new preventive doctrine?
Well, you see, there are 2 points, to your question. The first is that when something of this nature has been done, it is, you will expect the lay public to, want to know more exactly what has been done and what has been achieved. Insofar as the Air Force is concerned, there was a mission to execute, and the objectives of the mission have been achieved. That said, this is, preemptive non-military strikes. This is not the first time that has been done in the world. It's been done elsewhere in the world. If you can go back to, the Afghanistan post the hit on World Trade Center, etc. These actions have been taken. It's not been done in India. There is no doubt about it. So what this event has done very clearly opened the door and shown the political resolve that our policy of zero tolerance for terrorism stays, And if you are unwilling to do something about it, or you want to escalate these sort of issues, then we will come after you. We will come after you means we will come after the terrorists, no matter where they're holed up. So that, yes, if you call that a new paradigm in our context, no doubt about it, it is a new paradigm. And this is not going to be the end of it. I imagine that this will be the new policy, that with whatever wherewithal that we have, and like I say, military application is just one pillar of the other 3 or 4 pillars that the government has at its disposal to take out issues of this sort. So yes, it's a new paradigm. It's not been done earlier. The resolve is very clear now, and the message is extremely clear.
You're absolutely right in saying that it needs a multi-pronged strategy to be able to deal with Pakistan in a sustained manner. As we speak, Wing Commander Abhinandan, we are given to understand, has reached the Wagah border. That is the latest, but do remember that there is restricted access given to the media, at least on the Indian side. So what the images are on the Pakistan side, we don't know, but there is restricted access to media on the Indian side. But Wing Commander Abhinandan has reached the Wagah border. Ambassador Prakash, thanks very much for joining us. Let me come to you now and talk about the diplomatic efforts. India has, of course, been stepping up its attempts to convince international powers about the rationale behind its preemptive strike. The significant development today at the OIC, Sushma Swaraj speaking at the OIC as a guest of honor. Pakistan, finally, the Foreign Affairs Minister choosing not to go in protest, but has sent his envoy. Also, we are given to understand that there has been significant back-channel diplomacy at work to ensure the safe passage of Wing Commander Abhinandan, be it the Saudis, the UAE, or in fact the US. I mean, let's talk about the US, sir, because you had yesterday on the show said you believe that India's preemptive action against the Jaish-e-Mohammed terror camp, you believed was in coordination with the US. That seems to be borne out by the comments that have come in from President Trump. Before the Balakot strike, he said India is planning something big. Yesterday, before the announcement of Wing Commander Abhinandan's release, he said he's given to understand that there's reasonably attractive news that is going to come in from India and Pakistan. Let's talk about the role that the US is playing in all of this and the other actors as well, even though India maintaining that there is no third-party involvement.
Shireen, I think that we are seeing two things. One, an unprecedented international support for India. India's patience has been respected. India's right of counter-terror strikes has been recognized. I have, in my long diplomatic career, never seen such overwhelming international support. That is one. Two, India and US relations have come a very long way. I mean, we all remember 1971 when President Nixon was threatening India with USS Enterprise. And fast forward to 2019, when Secretary of State issues a statement, Pompeo, to say that, to refer to India's counter-terrorism measures, refer to India-US security partnership, defense partnership, to underline the fact that India and the US are responsible for peace and security in the region. Very significant, Shireen. India and US are responsible for peace and security. And then goes on to call on the Pakistani side to take action against the terror camps. So, and the frequency with which NSA John Bolton and our side have spoken, Secretary of State Pompeo and our side have spoken, I am, my own assessment is that there is a close coordination, and I won't be surprised, as I've said on your channel also earlier, if we find that eventually we find that there was very close coordination when India carried out the counter-terror strikes against the camps. And not just the US, Shireen. In fact, I think that countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like UAE, and even China played a role here to quietly tell, privately tell Pakistan to see the writing on the wall and cool it.
You're absolutely right. We are given to understand that the UAE, the Crown Prince speaking with both sides, Saudi is playing a role as well. Of course, the US yesterday, Pompeo and the NSA having a 25-minute conversation is what we're given to understand. But let's also talk a little bit, Praveen Swami, about what we now expect in terms of next steps. Also, the narrative now linking back to domestic constituencies, whether it's in Pakistan or here in India. We've seen the Prime Minister address a rally in Tamil Nadu saying that Wing Commander Abhinandan is the proud son of Tamil Nadu, so making that link as he addresses a rally in Tamil Nadu, but also saying that the UPA was soft on terror, making it very explicit that the UPA chose not to use air power. How do you react to that, Praveen? And this issue of using air power, which, as we've been discussing over the last few days, has been a consideration that both former Prime Ministers Vajpayee and Singh did consider, but didn't go through with.
This whole question about air power has been tossed around in India's strategic community for years. And to understand why Prime Ministers reacted in the way they did, I think it's important to understand some of the limitations of air power too. There have been some fairly hyperbolic numbers tossed around in the media about, the number of hundreds of fatalities at this camp. And I think some of that is more closely akin to Bollywood film than anything that happens in these airstrikes. So if you look at, say, the United States' far bigger camp or attack on the Zawar-Kili camp in Afghanistan, where Al-Qaeda was stationed, they killed a handful of terrorists, and that was when they launched 12 cruise missiles. The Israelis, quite frequently have struck in Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. They very rarely kill hundreds of terrorists. And that's because terrorist camps, unlike military camps, aren't sort of giant installations with lots of infrastructure and hundreds and thousands of people sort of sleeping there in neat things. The point of an attack like this is to signal to the other country that your patience is running out. Now, after 26/11, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh did consider similar attacks and simply felt they wouldn't achieve enough to justify the possible blowback. Prime Minister Vajpayee made exactly the same calculation after 26/11, except he thought a large conventional mobilization, a costly one, would give better results than just a one-off airstrike. Now, you can't blame politicians for trying to get whatever benefit they can from their actions. That is normal, that is politics. But I do hope that the doctrinal gains from this episode, the real gain, which is that India has decided that it does want to retaliate for terror, isn't undermined in politics. If this policy has to have any real benefits at all, it's going to have to be something that is sustained for several years, improved on, done again and again in creative and sustained ways. And any kind of political contention around this will completely sabotage that. In mature democracies, national security policy isn't something that politicians try and gain a point or two off. And I hope that won't happen in this coming election cycle.
Well, that certainly is the hope, but I don't know whether we are going to see that happen, that restraint being exercised or not. But M. Marshal Sharma, the point that was being made there by Praveen Swami, and we don't know, it looks fairly likely that it will be tossed around as part of the election narrative. But outside of that, sir, the need to ensure that this policy that we now, this new doctrine, so-called new doctrine that we have put in place is sustained, it's improved upon, it's innovated upon. That will be crucial for long-term benefits and long-term strategic implications.
Absolutely. I'd agree with Mr. Praveen on both the counts. The first being that, it's a demonstration that reach is not a problem for our country when it comes to pursuing these terrorists. That is one, and the other is the effectiveness of airstrikes over such distances completely depends upon the actionable intelligence that is provided. He is right. Earlier in Afghanistan as well as in Israel, the cost-benefit ratio has been questioned. But here, I would not like to hazard a guess in this case how many have been killed. Definitely, with the precision weapons that have been used, the infrastructure would have been completely flattened. And as for a loss of lives, that only time will tell. You know, once human intelligence tells us as to how many. So it is an instrument of choice. It's with the government. It is up to the government to use it. But expect this now, you know, instrument to be used often because, you know, as such, use of air power is not necessarily automatically escalatory. I think that is one issue that our, at our political, the government has understood. You know, it's unlike the army. When armies merge, when tanks are fighting battles, when mechanized forces are moving across, territories are lost, territories are gained, there's a lot of blood, then you only go to a ceasefire.
Right.
And ceasefires are very tenuous. You know, they can break into conflicts again. So it's a very difficult process from a ceasefire position to come back to international borders, and it can run to decades. And you've seen that in the case of India, Pakistan, India, China. Whereas what happens in the case of use of air power, particularly non-military and preemptive strikes, is that it always gives you a breather. You know, by itself, the Air Force does not occupy land. They always have to come back. You know, that is usually the case. And that gives you the breather for, you know, intense diplomacy to, you know, sort of calm and tone down the things. So air power, use of air power is not automatically escalatory. I think that point has been understood. And, you know, the events have sort of unfolded in front of you. That said, the use of air power in a situation like this is available to the government, and I don't see as to why it can't happen again. It could be the new normal now, in my view.
It could be the new normal, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. You know, this has been something that we've been talking about, that not just the use of air power, that is only one instrument in the hands of the government to be exercised. But this new doctrine and the many pieces of this new doctrine that we've talked about, this setting of a new threshold, so to speak, that we will only take so much and no further.
Yes, Shireen. Unfortunately, our neighbor has been indulging in blatant nuclear blackmail for so many years. Everybody, even if there was a slightest of issue, they would, you know, obliquely or directly talk of nuclear weapons. It's also a fact, going by media reports, that the command and control of the tactical, so-called tactical nuclear weapons, I have a difference, I have a view on that, but tactical nuclear weapons has been given to the field, the local commander, which is unprecedented. That said, it was something that we were taking in account, and perhaps it was holding back our hand. But we have finally decided that a stage comes when you say, you weigh the costs and say, look, we cannot tolerate the cost of constant terror attacks, and we have to take action. We understand that there is a cost for everything. There is cost for inaction and the cost for action. So we decided that we will, now if we have to bear the cost of action, we will do that. So I think we have crossed a threshold. By taking it right into mainland Pakistan. But I am not, and yes, if necessary, we will use military options again. That is also very, very clear. But history has demonstrated that military action alone is not a solution. Russia saw it in Afghanistan, USA saw it in Vietnam and Iraq.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Russia found it in Afghanistan, US found it in Vietnam and Iraq. So yes, we have to use diplomacy and military action, and other instruments at disposal very carefully, judiciously, in a calibrated fashion. And we have to take the international public opinion. And Shireen, last point is that we have to be very clear, and we are very clear, that our main objective is to dismantle or help dismantle the terror infrastructure in Pakistan. The others are sideshows. They will continue to happen. We'll continue to deal with them. But we have to laser-like stay focused on the main objective, and which will take patience and time, because it will take days, months, years, perhaps, to persuade Pakistan to see reason. Shireen?
Absolutely. Marshal Sharma, you wanted to make a point, sir?
Yes. You know, apropos what I said, I should not be misunderstood. Not once am I suggesting that the government will every time jump the gun and use military, engagement to address this point. It's a geopolitics and diplomacy must always and every time be the first steps, and just like the previous speaker has said, even international opinion. So that is a given. It is when things don't work and the government decides to use, the military at its, the military to sort out issues like this, then the use of air, there will be no hesitation in the use of air power. That is the point I was trying to make.
Marshal Sharma, there was no ambiguity in your statement. You were absolutely right.
Yes, I was just going to tell him that, but thank you very much, Ambassador Prakash, for saying that. No, we will ensure that there is no misunderstanding on this program. But Praveen Swami, let me come to you now. And, I want to pick up on the point that you made, Praveen, that you would hope that matters of national security are not sort of pandering to domestic compulsions, especially domestic electoral compulsions, and politicians don't try and use this to score points here or there. Now, Praveen, and I think we discussed the possibility of this, all of this private satellite imagery that's coming in, which, some corroborate what India has said, others don't, others are giving a different story. Now, as we see this playing out, Praveen, the war of narratives and perception, how do you see that working?
Yeah. Frankly, Shireen, I mean, I think one of the sadder things in our part of the world, and this is markedly true in Pakistan and maybe somewhat true in India, is that we get carried away with words, with emotions, and sometimes are not very well-grounded and calm in our appraisals of what is going on. A lot of these debates over how many people died and how many people didn't die or whatever happened will not get settled over time. It's important to know the truth, of course, but this is not, to me, the key thing. The important thing is really having a consensus on where we're headed and what price we are willing to pay for it. I mean, people talk about war very casually in television studios, and I guess I'm as guilty of that as anyone else. But war is not a casual thing. The great Greek historian Thucydides, who's considered the father of military history, writing in 315 BCE, once famously said that, think about war before you start it, because once you've started it, accident as much as planning plays a role in the outcome. And you never know where the chips will fall. As we look at this crisis, we can look back and think about all the things that could have gone wrong, about the possibility that pilots may have been shot down during the raids, not a day afterwards. We can wonder what might have happened if Pakistan had successfully hit military targets on the second day of the crisis. And we can consider all the awful consequences each of those acts have. As we shape a policy, a strategy, it's really important that leaders look back on these issues with dispassion and with calm, not clouded by the seduction of political gain. And I'm referring here to both sides of the political fence, or all sides of the political fence, rather. We cannot afford to let ourselves be carried away by political gamesmanship, or else whatever gains we've had will be squandered in very quick order.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I think we've been trying to do that, at least on our programs, that this is really time to exercise restraint and reason. And Marshal Sharma, just to take the points forward from what Praveen was saying, that we now need to build consensus on the next steps. The next steps diplomatically, the next steps on how we can go after the JEM and other terror outfits, what we choose to do in our engagement with Pakistan, how we choose to continue to try and put pressure on it economically, and as well as our engagement with foreign partners. the pieces that you would now look at in terms of being able to build some sort of a sustainable strategy from here on? And the third point that I want to get all three of you to comment on, because, there's this very interesting piece Robert Fisk has written, which has gotten picked up quite a lot on the imprint of the Israeli sort of influence on India's preemptive non-military strike. If I could start by asking you, Air Marshal Sharma, for your comments on both that.
Yeah, okay. You see, what next depends upon what the political objectives are. I think that has not changed. The, zero tolerance towards terror, whether from outside the border or whether supported from outside the border, either way, I think that policy will continue to remain. So, having taken these steps, I think now there is enough scope for both geopolitics as well as diplomacy, and that should be pursued to its logical end. And Pakistan must be made to, answer for what answers they have to give, the respect to the dossier that has been given to them. I think those are the next steps. So, if any such other incident, any other such tragic incident occurs, like the one that happened in Pulwama, I would doubt if the government is going to just sit back and relax. And I think they will take the necessary action. As far as the military is concerned, the military is always prepared. I mean, that. They are always in a high state of alert on events of this nature. So we'll rule that part out, because those are the sort of plans that already exist. But it's now for the political leadership, to define. As far as I see it, there is no big change. It's already there, it's in place, and I don't think our policies with respect to terrorism are going to change. What did you say regarding the Israelis, this thing? Sorry, I didn't get that.
I was reading an interesting piece which talked about how Israel's influence or imprint is very clear and evident on the manner in which India has conducted this preemptive strike across the line of control. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, okay, it's not necessary. I mean, you can, like I said, you can go back to the American strikes across Pakistan into Afghanistan, what Bill Clinton had done, and so many more strikes that have taken place. You've heard of these killer drones which are controlled from, distances like Florida, etc. And look at the cost exchange ratio, air to surface missile, which is so expensive, for a small truck where two people are sitting. So, these things happen, yes. If I may just sort of satisfy your sense that you have derived from the article, it is the same. Basically, Israel has the same strategy, zero tolerance towards terror, whether it comes directly from across the border or it is supposed to. So they will go after terrorists. So that is the I think the common ground, so to say, if you may.
Praveen, you want to come in on that? Because, there has been much deeper engagement between India and Israel. Yeah.
There has been. India has been a major consumer of Israeli equipment, which is really of the highest grade. But I think we should be, and we are conscious of the very different circumstances in which both countries operate. Israel's wars are not fought against a well-armed nation state, and particularly a nuclear weapon state. Its adversaries are terrorists operating in ungoverned areas of either its neighboring state, that is Palestine or Lebanon. It's never faced a conventional military adversary of the order of Pakistan, and certainly not with nuclear weapons. And it's worth remembering that Israel actually continues to grapple with a problem of terrorism 60 years later, just as we continue to grapple with a problem of terrorism. There isn't some sort of magic bullet that fixes these problems. The situation we are in is unprecedented. There is no other example in history where a nuclear-armed state has used terrorism as a proxy against its neighbor, another nuclear-armed state. And that's what's made it so difficult to find a response to it. Even now, we will have to feel our way through this, bearing in mind always that the really big prize here isn't ending terrorism. The really big prize, which Indian leaders for decades have been committed to, is making sure that we are able to grow as fast economically so that our people are lifted out of poverty and so that we cannot be intimidated by other countries in our neighborhood. That has to be the thing that is up and foremost in our minds.
Absolutely. In fact, as we speak, Wing Commander Abhinandan is in the VIP lounge. The Indian Air Force team will receive Wing Commander Abhinandan. That's the latest. Those are pictures coming in from the Atari border. The formalities have been done on the Pakistan side, and it's just a matter of time that I would imagine that all formalities are closed. But remember, as I pointed out, that there are restrictions on what the media can cover. The Indian government has made it absolutely clear they do not want this to become a public spectacle. Air Marshal Sharma, if I could go back to you, sir, and since those videos were released of Wing Commander Abhinandan in Pakistan custody answering the questions, and a lot of people were commenting on the courage shown by him, on how calm he was, how almost cool he was, this cool swagger that everyone's been talking about on social media. And I hate to personalize things, but, I wasn't a tad bit surprised because I've seen Indian Air Force pilots jumping into the cockpit. I mean, you've got to have nerves of steel to be able to do that day after day. Just anecdotally, sir, how you saw the reactions coming into those videos?
There is an element of training for fighter pilots who are expected, and other pilots who are expected to cross the border during a conflict. And so that training, you can see a part of the training which has come through, how to respond to interrogation. The first thing that you do after you've ejected and come down, you're expected to be injured somewhat, but it doesn't stop you from what you call escape and evasion. And this is exactly what he was doing. He was running, he was firing, he was undertaking this something called escape and evasion. Then whatever confidential and secret material you may have, you have to dispose that of. He was doing that. This is all part of the training. It is natural for a pilot who has been shot down in enemy territory or who has ejected in enemy territory to go through all this. And insofar as this interrogation thing is concerned, this is exactly what you're supposed to say. My name, number, religion, that's it. Rank, name, number, and religion. This is as per Geneva Convention. Now, you want to extract more from him, you'll have to go the distance. There is torture and things of that nature. That is also well known. But so it has been televised. I mean, it is there in social media. So I would, that is all right. That is part of training. But what you are, sort of underscoring is the confidence, the composure. That is the courage. That is the way he speaks. We as professionals recognize that. So he stood tall. And mind you, when he was doing all this, he was very injured. He didn't show that fear.
Yes.
And he asked questions, or rather he asked questions in return. So that is why, so it's good to see this, because this is in the highest sort of traditions and standards of the Air Force. And I believe he has done the country proud.
He certainly has done the country proud. Didn't show even the slightest degree of fear in the face of severe adversity. Admiral Ambassador Prakash, apologies. Let me come back to you, sir. We're still awaiting a final confirmation on whether Wing Commander Abhinandan has in fact been handed over to the Indian side. We're given to understand that the formalities have been completed on the Pakistan side, sir. Ambassador Prakash, on the point that was being made there by both Praveen Swami and Air Marshal Sharma in terms of building a consensus now on the next steps. We've got the UNSC meeting coming up in a few days, but that can only be one step, and it should not become the end-all and be-all of our focus. What post that?
No, it is certainly not the be-all and end-all. What we have now demonstrated is that we are not just going to build an international consensus, but we know that the buck stops at our table, and we will ourselves take whatever measures that have to be taken, and that, in my view, again is one very big difference. And obviously, let's go back to Pulwama attack and the aftermath of that, immediate aftermath of that. We had been discussing that India will take and has been taking and will continue to take, in my mind, a slew of measures, diplomatic, economic, political, military, to deal with this menace. And already some of the arrows have been fired from the quiver. There are many more to come, possibly downgrading diplomatic relations. We have already spoken about reviewing the Indus Water Treaty. We have spoken about the possibility, spoken about extending moral and diplomatic support to the persecuted people of Balochistan. And I would advocate that we should be seen to be boycotting Pakistan fully. Because if we are seen, for example, playing cricket with Pakistan, and then we say that, look, Pakistan is a terror state and please, it should be sanctioned, I think it will not go down very well if we kind of pick and choose. The only thing that we need to, I would advocate is that we will see signals, small signals, that Pakistan wants to move ahead, because after being so steeped in terror, obviously they will not overnight say, look, we are handing over X, Y, and Z to you or doing something. So we should be open to sensing those signals and working with Pakistan, because if there is an opening, we should grab it. Now, that opening may be a false opening, all right, we have options. But to say that either this or nothing, my way or highway will not work. So we will continue to use all options, we will stay the course, and whenever there is a positive signal from Pakistan, instead of scoffing at it, instead of nitpicking, I think we should look at it very closely, and I hope we will do so.
Well, gentlemen, I've already extended our time with you, unfortunately, because the situation is still developing, the story is still developing, so I would request your patience with us for a little bit longer if possible. But Praveen, if I could take that point that Ambassador Prakash was making forward with you, it would not be realistic on our part to expect that Pakistan would hand over Masood Azhar to us tomorrow or anything even remotely close to that. So what are the small signals that we are going to have to watch out for? What are the small signals that we should be willing to work with? If there is an opening, take it. So far, India's position has been that we're not willing to talk, we're not willing to negotiate with Pakistan until there is credible, verifiable, actionable evidence that they've acted on terror.
I think that's an excellent question, Shireen, and it's an extremely difficult one to answer, partly because monitoring these things is so difficult. But we do have precedents for this between 2003 and 2008, when General Pervez Musharraf's government decided to close the terror tap. We saw a de-escalation in fatalities in Kashmir year on year. Indian security force fatalities, for example, fell from several hundred to the low single digits inside of 5 years. One important signal would be whether Pakistan de-escalates in Jammu and Kashmir, turns off the terror tap on groups active in that region. A second important signal would be whether Pakistan is actually able to ensure that jihadist groups do not carry out large-scale bombings or terror attacks in other parts of the country, excuse me. We should be extremely sort of concerned and looking at what's actually happening in the large seminaries and infrastructure facilities that groups like the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba control. Are they raising funds? These are things that we can keep a watch on, that we know Pakistan's ISI can control to a very great extent, and these will be important signals. From Prime Minister Khan's side, meanwhile, there are things he can do short of handing Masood Azhar over. After the Pathankot attacks, we had identified perpetrators of those attacks in Pakistan. Pakistani investigators had accepted those perpetrators were in Pakistan, but said they'd mysteriously escaped. Are they able to bring back those low-level perpetrators? What happens with the 26/11 terror trial? These will all be sort of straws in the wind, you like, and I think our government will be watching them very, very closely.
Ambassador Sharma, if I could take that same question to you, sir, the small signals that we should now focus on, or the small objectives that we should focus on from here on, till the time that we build momentum to ensure that the big one, so to speak, is addressed.
Yes, in addition to what has just been said, I would imagine the first off, the dossier which has already been given on Pulwama, the government of India will expect a positive and a meaningful response from Pakistan, and sooner than later. And I think, certain other things will flow from that. At the diplomatic front, yes, like the ambassador said, there has to be a continuous pressure on Pakistan, and otherwise, all steps that need to be taken to isolate them internationally on this issue of terrorism must be taken. And I think we have enough international support on that. On the military front, I think it's a little premature to immediately, scale down or tone down everything. There is a state of alert. Things are not very clear right now. There, like I said, we need response on Pulwama. We have to see where they stand. Some more politics will take place. There is some more diplomacy. There is room for some more diplomacy. And I think it will be a little while longer before we all go back to our barracks. I think it will be a little while longer.
Oh, I think you make a very valid point, sir. In fact, that was what we were discussing just yesterday on my show, and I think it was the former Air Vice Marshal Subramaniam who said that he believes the radars will continue to. And that point has been made several times over. The radars will continue to churn. That's right. Marshal Sharma, just on, and while we're talking about, and we await Wing Commander Abhinandan's return, and this is a moment that India has been waiting for the last 24 hours. It's sad and unfortunate, though, that not much time and attention has been spent on the Mi-17 crash, sir, because 6 personnel, 6 air warriors lost in that, but very little news time or attention has actually gone, and they share the same space as Wing Commander Abhinandan. I mean, they were doing exactly what he was attempting to do as well. Absolutely correct. The B-17 V5 was on a real-time operational sortie, so to say. Whatever sorties are being flown at that time, whether it's a transport pilot or a helicopter pilot, these are all to do with operations, in some measure or the other, whether he was supporting it or he was, whatever mission that was given to him. I can guarantee you that the Air Force is paying enough attention to it. There is no doubt about it. It is just that, the media hasn't had the space, and certain other things are considered more important. I was talking about the public, sir. Absolutely. I would imagine that the Air Force is putting a lot of thought and attention on it. I was talking about the general public, sir. Absolutely. Yes. I'm aware that the Air Force is paying enough attention to this accident, whether it be the inquiry or looking after the families. All that is being taken care of. Maybe it needs to be known to the public as well. Yes, that sort of thing. Yes. Also with us, P.S. Ahluwalia, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, thanks very much for joining us, sir. We are still waiting for Wing Commander Abhinandan. He is at the Wagah border. We understand that the formalities on the Pakistan side have been completed. This is a moment that we've been waiting for the last 24 hours, sir. What would you expect now in terms of next steps? And of course, this is the first credible indication of a de-escalation on both sides, perhaps.
Well, credible de-escalation can only take place where the source of terrorism is eliminated. The young pilot coming back, Abhinandan, Wing Commander, that's a great joy for us that he's getting back. But leave that apart. The bigger question in the macro level is that it is for terrorism, proxy terrorism in our country, where we are losing so many lives and so many resources, and the pressure that is being put on us since 1990. So that is the issue that we have to address, and we are not going to get into discussions and any de-escalation, etc. Only when they dismantle the terrorist organizations that exist, the institutions that exist in Pakistan, and especially that are poised against India or anywhere in the world. We have to eliminate them. So that is the start point. Unless that happens, nothing is going to change.
Yes, but let's talk about tangible next steps, Marshal Ahluwalia. What is it that the realistic expectation and the realistic ask will be from here on?
Well, realistic would be, just like I mentioned earlier, that we have to see a credible action being taken against the fundamentalist organizations in Pakistan. We perhaps have to work with Pakistan in both ways. One is if we have to carry out any military operations to eliminate, and I repeat, eliminate only terrorists, not against their military installations, not climb the escalation ladder, then it's a different matter. But if they do not climb down, or they do not, stop all these terrorist activities, then we have to continue maintaining a posture that is going to put pressure on them, that is going to make them feel that there is high risk in what they're doing.
Right. Praveen Swami, how do you read it? I mean, we're not off the escalation ladder just yet, but do you believe that for now there is likely to be a period of status quo?
I agree with the contention that India and Pakistan, because of this terrorism issue, are always on the razor's edge. I mean, the next crisis is always, unfortunately, right around the corner. But I think there's one thing that we should, or two things rather, that we need to be very, very cognizant of and probably discuss more thoroughly. The first is that warfare is dynamic. You are not doing something against an adversary who's going to do nothing back. This is a robust adversary. In 2016, when we went across the line of control and hit some of their launchpad training camps, they did hit us back over the next 2 years. In 2017 and 2018, our security force fatalities actually rose. And you cannot go across the line of control every time something happens. This time, too, Pakistan showed that it was willing to attempt to ratchet things up. And I, for one, am profoundly grateful one of those bombs did not hit the brigade headquarters in Nowshera, because that could have sparked off far wider events than we initially counted on or bargained on. But you can be pretty sure that Pakistan's going to do something in coming months. So we need to prepare to anticipate and not to imagine that, we've done this and the story ends here. This is punctuation, not sort of the end of the story. The second important thing to remember, which I don't think we talk about often enough, is that irrespective of what Pakistan does or doesn't do, we have a genuine problem in Jammu and Kashmir. There are ever larger numbers of young people signing up to join these jihadist groups. Recruitment numbers have gone up steadily over the last several years. And we have to find the tools and the means to address that. Our security forces are doing a fantastic job. The numbers of terrorists being eliminated in Kashmir has gone up every year. But that is of only so much use if ever larger numbers of young Kashmiris are also joining these groups. And that problem is ultimately political. We need to find political answers to it. And we need to find ways of intervening in Kashmir so that the seduction of young people by the jihadist message is tamped down and gradually moderated. There are some indications that the government today is taking some measures to crack down on hardline Islamist formations, but we need much more. And we need political engagement with a generation of young people in Kashmir who sadly are completely alienated from India today. I mean, that is an unpleasant reality, but it is reality. And I hope our politicians are thinking about what they need to be doing to reach out to this youth cohort. Because like I said, it's no use simply shutting down a terror camp in Pakistan if you have 300 young people willing to blow themselves up in Kashmir tomorrow. That also needs to be addressed.
Oh, absolutely. That will have to be part of the sustained strategy that India adopts. Political engagement in the valley, in Jammu and Kashmir, that is going to be crucial. But, Marshal Ahluwalia, let me ask you the question that Praveen raised. And I think after preemptive non-military strike, the assumption was that, Pakistan doesn't have the capacity. It has its back against the wall. It's virtually on the brink of a financial meltdown. And hence, it's unlikely to retaliate or respond in any meaningful fashion. Yet, we saw Pakistan raise the stakes, target military installations, cross the line of control, use air power. So this, do you expect that the initial assumption, perhaps we got a bit wrong?
I think it's very clear that back is against the wall. And when you see the activity that was done by them, by sending aircraft at 10 o'clock or 10:30 in the morning and sending them that altitude where they would be picked up. So this was a step taken by, can we say, an adversary whose back is against the wall. They were trying to play to their domestic audience. They were also trying to play for us that, look, we are going to do something. So they had to do something, and that is what they planned to do. Unfortunately, it went out a little out of hand, and we lost the pilot, which they had pretty. So it was not that they wanted to hand over this pilot, very gracefully, or they wanted to. It was because they did not want to climb the escalatory ladder. There was a lot of pressure put on them. There is a lot of pressure economically, diplomatically, and very importantly, please note that it is Saudi Arabia, it is UAE, and it is not, repeat, not the United States that makes any difference to them. Yes, they would like to keep the United States very happy and pleased, but they have done this at the behest of the Arab countries like Saudi, for which they are very, very dependent on them, apart from China. So it's China, Saudi, UAE that have advised them that don't climb the escalatory ladder, stop it now, and that is why they were handing him over. They've taken the high ground. Unfortunately for us at that time, they've taken the high ground and they've handed over this pilot. But they haven't done it willingly. They have done it because they were in a position where they had to do it. Now the question comes up, what do we do next? What do we do next? Now they've handed him over. We have accepted it happily, but it does not mean that our resolve against terrorism will be diluted in any form or manner. That is not going to happen. And that has to be a credible action which is discernible, that Imran Khan, whatever he's been saying outwardly, follows it up, and very, very importantly, that the army also understands that it is not in Pakistan's interest to go into a conventional war. They know it. They are aware of it, and they will not want to do it. Let's not even talk about the nuclear umbrella. That's all nonsense. There's no such thing as any effective tactical nuclear weapons, and we don't want to get into that subject. But let's not get carried away that they've got nuclear weapons, so it means that our hands are tied and we can't do anything else. No, that's not the case, and we have to be cautious. We have to have the resolve and continue putting pressure on them till they themselves, through their internal mechanisms, their internal dissensions, the situation that they're in, they collapse. But we don't want an unstable Pakistan also, because an unstable Pakistan can be at our peril. We have to be cautious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. An unstable Pakistan is bad news for India. Arjun Subramaniam, former Air Vice Marshal, also with us. Air Vice Marshal Subramaniam, many thanks for joining us. We were discussing this yesterday, and what we saw at the end of that joint briefing by the three services, the Indian Air Force, the Navy and the Army, was a show of strength, a display of military resolve, as well as sending out a message of deterrence. Now, as we wait by for Wing Commander Abhinandan's return across the border, sir, what would you be watching out for in terms of next steps?
Yeah, Shireen. Actually, I think I'll take it on from where Air Marshal Ahluwalia left off, and try and offer a slightly different perspective. While we are extremely happy that we've had the international community supporting, and sort of impressing upon Pakistan about the need to return our pilots. But let us not sort of underestimate our own resolve, the efforts of our own political establishment, the coercive impact of some of the military actions that have been taken over the last couple of years. I think it's a whole combination of factors. And I think to attribute Abhinandan's release so sort of vehemently to the fact that Pakistan couldn't cope with international pressure is not doing entire justice to our own capability and our own capacity to sort of change some form of opinion within Pakistan. And so that's the slightly differing perspective that I had, that let's give ourselves also a little bit of credit to be able to force Pakistan to reflect on the speed with which they need to return our pilots back.
Sure. I think that point has been well made, and that is perhaps the larger message that came through from that preemptive non-military strike. But Arjun Subramaniam, what's going through your head as you wait by? Those pictures are coming in from the Atari-Wagah border. There's a fair degree of restraint being exercised because restrictions have been put on the Indian media. The government has made it very clear they don't want this to become a tamasha, a public spectacle. But, you know, what's going through your head? I know that you were deeply upset the day that this unfortunate event took place where Pakistan had Wing Commander Abhinandan in their custody. But now that he's all set to return, the thoughts going through your head?
You know, again, I will not go over the top. I think the restraint that has marked this particular event is what ought to have been done. This is not a tamasha. This is not a spectacle. This is a professional return of a warrior who has gone through a lot, and he cannot be made either a poster boy or a spectacle. Okay, and yes, you mentioned a personal thing. I was upset. Abhi's father's Varta commanded the same squadron that I commanded. We were Commodore Commandants of the Rhinos in succession, and therefore my first impression was I hope he gets back in one shape. And then, you know, when events unfolded about his having shot down an F-16, that sort of sparks off a different set of emotions. Wow, I said. I mean, here's a MiG-21 Bison shooting down an F-16 as claimed by the Indian Air Force, and rightly so, probably.
Yeah.
And so these are the kind of host of emotions that sort of have run through my mind over the last, couple of days.
You know, I think you make a very important point that it is important not to turn this into a spectacle and not to turn Wing Commander Abhinandan into a poster boy, and we do tend to do that very often. I would imagine that that's natural in these circumstances, but restraint is of course something that we have been advocating ever since this started. But Praveen Swami, you know, just on that briefing issue, and if I could get you to comment on that, of course the timing of the briefing was changed on account of the developments because Imran Khan made that assurance of the return of Wing Commander Abhinandan. But then the manner in which the evidence was presented, you know, it looked, it could have been done a little better, wouldn't you say?
Shireen, let me be blunt about this and say it was really a little tasteless, wasn't it? I mean, I do not find it nice that, bits of things are held up in press conferences and waved around. This is something that the Indian Armed Forces have historically never done, this kind of display and
never done,
whatever,
yeah.
and have never done in the past, and I hope it doesn't happen again. Professional, well thought through briefing on the facts, the numbers. The armed forces have often conducted such thoroughly professional briefings in the past. It's one of the things that has distinguished our armed forces from the armed forces of Pakistan, that we don't go around, singing and dancing and using the stage for propagandistic performance. And I really hope the older, more solid culture will again come forward. As for general briefings, countries all over the world succeed in keeping their media well briefed, objectively briefed on events as they are unplaying. This has been a problem that has dogged Indian, if you like, public diplomacy from 1998, 1999. There was all manner of confusion in everything from the Kargil war to 26/11 because official spokespersons were unable to convey information in a timely, coherent and cogent manner. And one would have thought we've had enough decades to sort these things out. Maybe it's time somebody, I know the government has a great many other more important things to be thinking about right now, but I hope that somebody has this down in the footnotes of their diary somewhere as something that ought to be sorted out.
Right.
If we're going to be a country that is going to be more muscular in its operations, more have a greater appetite for risk, then one of the elements of that also has to be transparency and professionalism in the communication of information. And I hope that lesson will be considered. If I may just add, and blasphemously so that I'm not a great fan.
Yeah.
I said, if I may add a little blasphemously, I'm not a great fan. I'm not a great fan of the Wagah retreat ceremony either. I don't think great nations should put on really a dance performance in the evening. It's something a little more sober and restrained, in my view, would be much better.
Well, let me put that point across to Air Vice Marshal Subramaniam. On both the issues that Praveen Swamy raised, the manner in which that press briefing was conducted yesterday, the manner in which the evidence was shown up, was there some discomfort, that you felt seeing that? And also this issue of this being really a time when there is also a conflict of information and a conflict of narratives. How best should we deal with that?
The last portion of Praveen Swamy's observations about how communication procedures, drills, and transparencies are the hallmark of a leading power, and if we want to be seen as a slightly more muscular power, I think I fully take those observations. Public relations, communications, particularly in this era of social media and disinformation, is even more important. And also, I think we also need to learn not to be afraid of saying something wrong and then probably a couple of hours later correcting ourselves to say that as the fog of war lightens, this has come to light, and things like that. So I think, yes, a more transparent and frequent expression or frequent communication of events as they progress is something which is extremely important.
Major General Harsha Kakkar also with us. Major General Kakkar, many thanks for joining us. We're still waiting for Wing Commander Abhinandan. The Indian Air Force team is at the Wagah border to receive him. He is being repatriated in a short while from now. Your first thoughts on that specific development and the implications that this will have in the current state of affairs between India and Pakistan?
You see, at the moment, what has happened is Pakistan took the action of unilaterally announcing his return within 24 hours. Now, the reason for that, it's not exactly that one would say international pressure, yes, Indian pressure, yes. The other is Pak, by doing this, was actually signaling from their side that we've de-escalated, we'd request you to do the same. It was a message sent. Whether India accepts it, whether India agrees to it, because the ceasefire violations are still running. The air violations, which was actually the major cause of tension between the two, is what it cooled down. So that is possibly what they're trying to signal, because for them to continue on this level at which we had gone was very, very detrimental. For them to mobilize was an economic disaster. For them to try and think that they could face the Indian forces, despite all our shortcomings, would have been an economic collapse almost. So for them, it was ideal that you go in for de-escalation, rather than, you could also hear at the same time Imran attempting to talk to Modi, but Modi unwilling to accept the call. So that sort of a scenario, the only way you could signal is by yourself taking a unilateral decision, announcing that you're going to send him back, which you had to in some time frame, maybe later, maybe a little more, but you had to do it. But by doing it immediately, you were actually trying to send a message, look, let's start moving down.
So, since you're saying that Pakistan has taken that unilateral decision to indicate its willingness to get moving, India so far has maintained, and that is our current position as well, that there can be no engagement with Pakistan in any shape or form till they provide verifiable information on acting against terror on Pakistan soil. So where does that then leave us? Where do we go from here?
You see, this does not in any way indicate that we're looking for going in for talks. Talks is kilometers away. There is no question of that anywhere. What it is only mentioning or requesting for is a de-escalation. That's all. It is not anything beyond that. There is no way we're going to think of talks. There's no way we're going to cool down the pressure, whether it's diplomatic or economic. The only thing that's going to happen is they're looking at us seeking to de-escalate the military aspect, mainly the air aspect.
Yes, mainly the air aspect. In terms of the small signals, and Praveen Swami and the rest of our guests, we were just talking about this. The next small signals that we should look for in terms of what Pakistan will try and do to continue to de-escalate and ensure that it finds itself a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of breathing space. Beyond this, the restricting ceasefire violations across the line of control, which has continued to happen over the last few days, the airspace violation has stopped for now. What would you like to see in terms of the next steps from Pakistan that can be read as signals for India? Major General Kakkar?
Yes. Sorry, you asked me. What?
Yeah,
I mean, in fact, if you're... Okay,
yes, sir.
I thought you were talking to Praveen. I'm sorry. What we would look at as the next step now from Pakistan is some sort of an action against Jaish, some sort of a means of pushing the Jaish down, something to indicate that you are moving forward and trying to convince India that we have begun to act.
Major General Kakkar,
slow steps.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you, sir. I'm interrupting you because the news flash is in. This is the moment that we're waiting for. Wing Commander Abhinandan has returned to India. He has been handed over to Indian authorities. The Pakistan Army has handed over Wing Commander Abhinandan to India. That's the news flash that's breaking on your screens. There are no pictures, though, just yet. But this is what we're given to understand. Wing Commander Abhinandan has returned to India. My colleague Parikshit Luthra has been tracking this story very, very closely. Parikshit, that's the big breaking story. You were on top of this through the morning. Wing Commander Abhinandan being handed over to India. Crossed over at exactly 5:20.
That's right, and he crossed over at 5:20. He had arrived... Exactly, and he had reached the Wagah border about an hour back. He was sitting with the Pakistani Rangers. I guess that's where the handover to the consular officials from the Indian High Commission must have also happened. I believe he must have been escorted through the Wagah border by the air attaché of our air attaché in the Pakistan High Commission. Now he would be flown to Amritsar, and from Amritsar he would be taken to Delhi. His parents would also be meeting him. Whether it's at Amritsar or at Delhi, that is something we cannot confirm at this juncture. He will go through a medical examination. Possibly he would be taken to a hospital in Amritsar. This is what we're given to believe. There will be a debrief as well. Our intelligence officials, Air Force officials would sit with him, ask him about what exactly happened. But yes, a moment of relief for his family, for Indians across the country, for the government, for the Air Force as well. A moment of pride because he had played a stellar role in that operation against the Pakistani Air Force. It was no easy operation. You had almost 20 Pakistani fighter jets which had entered Indian airspace, and Wing Commander Abhinandan was flying a MiG-21. A lot has been said about that operation, but he has spent almost 24 to 36 hours in Pakistani custody. He would be questioned about that. But India trying to tone down the celebratory mode, trying to send out a message that it's not all over. We've not won the larger war against terrorism. Even today, Sushma Swaraj at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation made this point that we need to win the war against terrorism. And that was a victory for India because we were the guest of honor. Pakistan withdrew, boycotted the entire ceremony. I guess it was Pakistan's loss. But let's keep the focus on Wing Commander Abhinandan. He's coming back home finally, and he's crossed over at 5:20. And very soon he would be with Air Force officials. He would be with his family as well.
Well, that is right. Crossed over at 5:20. As Parikshit is pointing out, he will be brought to New Delhi for the debrief and, of course, for medical attention. That is standard operating procedure. But Parikshit, if I could go back to there are no pictures so far of him being handed over to the Indian authorities. But I would imagine, as you pointed out, that the government is trying to keep this away from the glare of the camera and the media because they don't want the narrative that was being that was perhaps sort of starting to take shape of this being an act of generosity on the part of Pakistan. That narrative is what the government wants to quash.
You know, we were just speaking to some defense officials and they were joking. They were actually daring us to see if we can even get a photograph of Wing Commander Abhinandan. And that's possibly because the government does not want any coverage of that entire procedure. They don't want celebrations to happen. They don't want too much of hysteria, media hysteria over it, because they feel that we would be playing in the hands of Pakistan. Pakistan and Imran Khan are making this look as a grand gesture of peace on the part of their country to the international community when they are under global pressure to crack down on terror. And the narrative would shift. And this is what our forces have been also feeling over since morning, that because of the media hysteria, the narrative that India had been building against terror, against Pak-sponsored terror, that has completely shifted. While Wing Commander Abhinandan is definitely a hero, what he did was absolutely remarkable, and we are dying to have him back home. Let's not just change the narrative with one individual. This is what top government sources had said yesterday, and these were highly placed sources familiar with what was happening for the last few days, that let Pakistan not think that Wing Commander Abhinandan or releasing him is some sort of negotiating card. This is not a negotiating card, and they will not let Pakistan hold the entire nation hostage.
Absolutely. Praveen Swami, just to take that point forward, and once again, I want to reiterate for the benefit of the audience that may just be tuning in, though I would imagine that everyone's been tuned in for the last several hours to their television screens. There are no pictures of Wing Commander Abhinandan crossing over, because that has been the conscious decision taken by the Indian government, and rightly so. We've seen a lot of hysteria on our television screens over the last few days, and I would imagine that this doesn't deserve to become a public tamasha. But Praveen Swami, to the point that was being made there by Parikshit, that the Indian government being very clear, they did not want another Kandahar. The Indian government's position was that in Kandahar, Pakistan used the pressure exercised by Indians on India to get what they wanted, and the government was clear that there could be no deal involving Wing Commander Abhinandan's repatriation.
I think that was an eminently sensible position. I mean, if you think back, Prime Minister Modi must have anticipated, even on the day of our first strikes in Pakistan, that after all, pilots could be shot down, become prisoner of war, even worse, be killed. That is a risk the commander-in-chief of any force takes any time a decision is made to go to war. And one of the things I think India's public needs to possibly absorb, which hasn't been fully absorbed, is that hitting back at Pakistan isn't sadly going to be a cost-free enterprise. It's not something that's going to happen where we'll have, endless, unchallenged victories. And maybe this is something that the government, with the statements yesterday, was trying to send home, that look, you have to understand that this is something that comes with costs. And we are not going to allow the emotional reaction that was there yesterday of wanting our soldier back, that this is not going to be something that is going to dictate policy. I think that is an important message which went out.
Absolutely. I think we still have Major General Kakkar with us. Major General Kakkar, on the point that was being made, I think, by one of our guests earlier, and that is the details that we now have on the operation and the manner in which it was conducted. This is, of course, information from the joint briefing of the three services yesterday. Air Vice Marshal Kapoor stating that there was the Mirages, the Sukhois and the MiG-21s that the Indian Air Force put into operation to take on the Pakistan package, the Pakistan Air Force, when the incursion took place. It is, we were talking about the importance of the fact that this is a MiG-21 Bison, upgraded nevertheless, likely to be phased out later this year, that took down an F-16 as per the Indian claim.
Correct. I mean, in fact, if you look at it, the nearest aircraft or the nearest airfield will react the first. So the MiG-21s were the first to reach. They took on the F-16s. The Sukhoi was there. The Mirages had come in. Now it was this MiG-21 Bison which hooked on to the F-16, and he got him in his sights. And there was, I mean, once the dogfight has begun, there's no way of getting out. He got him down, happened to get shot, and as per what the report, if you heard that same, the briefing last evening, the parachute drifted into POK.
Yes. That's right.
But it was one of those, and after all, when you've gone in for the operation, whether it was the mirages in the night, and it was the park counter and the dogfight that followed, there were always chances of an odd casualty happening. There were always chances of an aircraft going down. The government of India would have considered what would have happened had it been a fatal casualty, what should be its stand in case it had been someone who had been captured. That would have all been war game beforehand, that these are, after all, one of the alternatives that can happen. And how should the government of India act?
Yeah.
So this would have already been considered, worked out, and mentally it would have been framed by the government, because this is how the game normally goes.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's the point that Praveen was making as well, that all of these considerations would have been factored in, would have been weighed on as part of the war room strategy of the Indian Armed Forces as well as the Indian government. I think it's an important point that Praveen makes, and Major General Kakkar also alluding to that, you know, these operations are not cost-free operations. There could be costs on either side, and both sides have obviously had to keep those in mind while going through with this. But the big news at this hour, Wing Commander Abhinandan going through Indian customs, crossed over at 5:20, going through Indian customs at this hour, and we are given to understand that the Indian Air Force will make a statement shortly. The Indian Air Force is expected to make a statement shortly. Again, you know, I very, very rarely personalize this, but as someone who's lived more than half of my childhood on Air Force bases across various parts of India, this is a moment, and the Indian Air Force is a large extended family, so I feel very, very strongly for the fact that we've got Wing Commander Abhinandan back home unharmed, and now going through the process of completing the formalities of repatriation. We haven't taken a break in very, very long. We'll take a quick break and come back with more details. Praveen Swami, thank you for your patience. I don't know if you have time to stay with us any longer. And Major General Kakkar, thanks very much again, sir. This is a story that's unfolding live here on television screens. So thanks very much for your time. We'll be back in a moment and rejoin you if you do have the time. Thanks very much.